Pray. Father, thank you that we have your word. Thank you that you are a communicating God, that you love to tell us your will, and it's contained in scriptures which you've preserved for us for ages. And we thank you for this passage. Please help me to explain it and help us to understand it. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be familiar with the fact that I've been working through some ancient Jewish texts, and I think, that's it, the ancient words of God is that title slide that I have there for it. And these texts that I've picked draw on a rich Jewish heritage. They sort of come out of and embellish our understanding because of the Jewish culture. You might have heard the saying, a religion is the dress of its the culture is the dress of its religion. So, when a nation has a culture of some kind, it's always expressed in its religion. Well, the Jewish religion, of course, Judaism, is rich, and that's much of it we have recorded here. And Jesus was Jewish, and his sayings and many of his idioms that he uses only can help us understand the Bible texts. So that's what we've been doing. So today we're looking at this verse, do not judge, to find out what about that verse did the Jewish people say and understand that helps us to understand it. You've probably heard it said, you can't judge, and I think it's probably the best known verse in the world. I think even most non-believers know it, and they'll quickly tell you. But it's one of the most misused texts too. We all know in these days how a comment or an opinion expressed, especially on our wonderful social media channels, will draw a very, very quick and savage response from people, especially if it's about an ethical or a spiritual issue that we feel strongly. Christians are often slammed as bigots and narrow-minded and judgmental. And it's well instanced by the same-sex marriage debate and abortion. The things that surrounded those things. I read this week where Martin Iles made a comment about the proposed Indigenous voice to Parliament in his column, The Truth of It, and was then later attacked by Senator Pat Dobson, accusing him of hateful diatribe. Now, there's a picture of Martin there and what he said. And he said this in response: hate is a motive. It's a condition of the heart. It's the desire to see someone's destruction. And in Australia these days, we throw it around way too lightly. And that's true, isn't it? You hear, that's hate speech. You must hate us. Oh, you're homophobics, or you are this or that. And so these are words of judgment. Hate is a motive. Hate is a moral judgment. If you're hating someone, it's a moral judgment on them. So here's a clear example of this condemnation and this judgment that Jesus is speaking about right here. It's a condemnatory spirit, a readiness to morally judge. Our culture is saturated with it. Not only ours, but America's and, all the West. And as I said, social media drives this sort of attitude. Now, two things arise from this, I think. One, Christians and the church at large find themselves tiptoeing around because we don't want to get labelled as judgmental, so we don't say the things that we perhaps ought to say. And Albert Mohler, probably one of the finest authors from Southeastern Baptist Seminary in America, says this in a book. He said, we can't be silent. We've been silent, and now what's happened? We've lost it, he believes. The West has lost, and he's probably one of the ones who would say, can Jesus win the West back? The second thing happens is that we can become partakers of it too. We slide into it, this judgmental, this to and fro, that same spirit. So there's an outline there. I think, Jeanette, if we can read it. Oh, it's very light, isn't it? So in this passage, I wanted to say four things. Avoiding the spirit of the age. How do we do it? And one of the remedies is to see people just like yourself. We're all the same. And one of the Jewish things that I'll be drawing out of this passage is judging favourably. Not giving people the benefit of the doubt so much, but just judging generously. And, well, we want that commendation by Christ. So there's the four things. Let's start. First one, avoiding the spirit of the age. It's good that we can dig a little deeper to find the truth about this statement, do not judge, because it needs clarification for us. Does Jesus say this because he doesn't want us to have any opinions? Not at all. Does he say it's because he doesn't want us to make any judgments? Not at all. Jesus is saying this for a very good reason, and the reason might strike you as obvious when you realise that this is set in the Sermon on the Mount. And he's speaking to who in the Sermon on the Mount? His people, Christian brothers and sisters, his church, his people. He's speaking to us today in these verses. It is significantly a Christian ethic that we don't judge. The world, they will, but we are not to. Well, how are we not to? What do you mean? So when we have a look at the context, we'll find that the word judge is in the Greek, krino, to decide a court case or to discern something, so it's the same meaning. It has a dual meaning. So it could be, decide something between this and that, a simple thing, not really moral. But then secondly, there's a moral judgment where you condemn someone. So it has an ambiguous kind of meaning, same word, one word. Then the Hebrew words, dan and shaphat. Well, dan means the same, to discern, decide between two things, and shaphat is the moral one, to judge and condemn. There's ambiguity, and it's there, we have to deal with it. And when we read this text, we have to go, all right, the context is what? So then we can decide how we're to understand it. So in the context, Jesus is saying to us, and if you've got Matthew 7 open, it would be really helpful, because I'll be sort of referring to that. He says, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So this is not talking about, well, I've got to decide between right and wrong. That's not that sort of judgment. It's not going to our brother and saying, or our sister and saying, hey, you know what, there's something in your lifestyle right now that doesn't seem right. And do that gently. He's not saying don't do that, because he encourages us to speak the truth in love, to be honest. But instead, he's talking about this law of, being spiritually condemning us, spirit, an attitude that is embedded in us. And he speaks about it in Matthew 5:22. So if you just flick back a little bit, and Matthew 5:22 says this, "But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Rakah, is answerable Sanhedrin, but anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell." Well, what's the difference? Really the same difference here that we've been talking about, the ambiguity of those words. Well, one, Rakah, is kind of like, oh, you're so stupid. And for that, it was an insult. It was a bit like, spitting at someone in the Jewish culture. That was an insult. And you'd have to go to the Sanhedrin. A bit like going to the civil court to have that dealt with. But if you said, you fool, that was morally condemning that person. Because as we know, Psalm 14 says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. And so a fool is someone who has no hope of being in heaven. And if you call someone a fool, you're condemning them to the fires of hell. And that's why Jesus says that. He says, if you call someone a fool, you'll be in the danger of fires of hell. That's a judgmental statement. I don't know whether that has the same connotation in our culture. I think I've possibly called someone a fool sometime. But we need to be remembering that this is talking about a principle. How do we view people? How do we come down on them? How do we hold ourselves above them? How do we set the standard that we have on others? And all that sort of thing's wrapped up in this. Well, let me just go to the next point. When we're ready to condemn someone, remember that they're just like yourself. We shouldn't condemn because, one, we're hopeless at judging others. We can't judge their hearts. We don't know what's going on in someone's life. We don't know the motives of another person's actions. There are people who will sin deliberately and wickedly. Yes, we know that. We sometimes can't even evaluate our own motives. Our hearts are deceptive and wicked. We're told that in Jeremiah. And sometimes we have to be told, did you know what you're doing? No, I didn't know. God alone searches the hearts. He's the perfect judge. And we have to leave it to him to judge people's motives. Secondly, we are always biased toward ourselves. Sin does that. And we're also prone to minimise our own failings. Take, for example, King David. When Nathan told the story of the rich neighbour stealing the poor farmer's only little ewe lamb, he was enraged. David was furious. He should die. The plank in his own eye blinded him. All he could see was the speck in the rich man's eye. And this is how judgmentalism works. It blinds us to our own sin because it's built on a standard that we've applied to someone else. And that's really wrong. In saying this hard teaching, Jesus used this familiar language to his hearers. He was a carpenter, so he talks about the beam and the speck. Now, if you go into any carpenter's workshop, you'll find beams and specks. It's fairly normal, isn't it? Sawdust. And so he uses this hyperbole together with these images to make the point. And he uses a bit of humour along the way to deal with a very serious subject. And he did that a lot. Remember, cut off your hand if it causes you to sin. Well, he didn't really mean to go and cut your hand off or to gouge out your eye. It wasn't literal, it was hyperbole. And it makes the point. It gets a point across really well. And, there's something ridiculous about the picture of someone walking around with a ceiling rafter hanging out of their eye, trying to tell someone else that they've got a speck of sawdust, doesn't it? It makes a point. Thirdly, Jesus wants us to be humble and fair in our assessment of others. We should be harsher on ourselves than we should be on others. Luke records Jesus in 6:38 that Bruce read for us, with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And I believe that this means one day we'll be standing before God to give account of our lives and attitudes, and unless we abolish judgmental attitudes, we ourselves will receive condemnation from God. And that's a powerful thing to think about. So what is this saying? How can we sum this up? Well, Don Carson has a very pithy statement. He says, regarding this, it's possible to exclude oneself from receiving mercy by having a sustained condemning spirit. To exclude oneself from receiving mercy. Okay, so we've looked at the negative side of this. How are you doing? How do you do at this whole thing of judgmentalism? And I'm not talking about salvation by works. We don't not judge so that we won't be judged. We don't forgive so that we will be forgiven. But what does the Scripture say about these things? Well, it's saying that if you're the kind of person who's received forgiveness, you're the person who's going to forgive. If you're the sort of person who's understood, if you're a non-condemning sort of person, it's likely you understand well God's condemnation of your own sin and you're acquainted with self-examination. That's what it's saying. If you have an attitude of judgmentalism, you either don't realise how bad it is, you need to be told, or you're not saved. That's basically how I read this. It may occur to us that Jesus is contrasting the behaviour of the Pharisees here. It's they who hold themselves in high regard. Remember? Not everyone, and everyone not a Pharisee, they used to hold in contempt. Jesus told a parable of the two men in the temple. You know, one man went down, beat his breast, said, "Lord, I'm a sinner, forgive me." The other man, a Pharisee, went and said, "Oh, Lord, thank you, I'm not like him." And Jesus said, no, the man who beat his breast went home just that day, justified. The Pharisee is someone who was confident of his own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, and that certainly leads to judgmentalism. They were more concerned with the external, the outward. But Jesus describes life, as Christian life, as inward, largely. It's in here. And we're not to pull our attitudes, our values out and apply them to others and then judge them when they don't raise them, because that's what verse 6 is all about in chapter 7 of Matthew. Jesus there says, you know, there are some things that you just don't give to people who you know are going to tear you apart. If you go to an abortion clinic and stand outside, you're going to get, and protest, you're going to cop it. If you put up a slogan about marriage is for men and women only, you're going to cop it. Because that's what the world does. Well, we need to make a distinction there, don't we, about how we treat those people. Some that we're not going to tell the gospel to, and there are others who we will. There are those who are seeking Christ, and we want to make that distinction about them so we know how to deal with them. You've heard the saying, the heart of the matter is the heart, is a matter of the heart. And this is true. In this Sermon on the Mount, we find Jesus is revealing a lifestyle that is basically about our hearts. It's about where's your heart. This is a Christian lifestyle is a lifestyle that's upside down. You put others first, you sacrifice yourself, you see others' needs before your own, you treat others as more important than yourself, and if there are leaders in it, they serve and they don't lord it over. There's nothing like it in the world. It's unique. Christian life is like to be like that. And it comes out because the heart has been changed. There's the only way it can happen. The heart's been renewed. The Holy Spirit has come and indwelled the believer. And now our interactions with others are transformed. It enables us to keep the golden rule. Do we know the golden rule? We know that, don't we? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And we can do that because the Holy Spirit gives us the attitude, the heart of Christ. And Jesus says you should love your neighbour as yourself. I'm sure you don't want to be condemned, neither do I. I don't want people to judge me. And so he says, love your neighbour by not judging them. How do I follow Jesus in relation to other people? Well, as you want good things for yourself, want them for your neighbour. I don't want to be judged, so I'll not do that to my neighbour. So this is where we come to the Jewish richness that comes out. So for next, I think there's a slide outline again, please. Yep, we're looking at judging favourably. The Jewish people, over centuries, developed a line of thinking about judging. And around the time of Jesus, there was this thing called big-hearted lifestyle, where the rabbis taught that each person needed to take their thumb off the scales. Each person need to judge favourably. Now, you get that picture from the marketplace, right? You go to the old, the big scales that hang in the marketplace, and you put things on, and the dial goes around, tells you how much you've got in it. Well, one of the old tricks was to put your thumb on it while you were weighing, of course, and that was in the seller's favour. You gave less than the person was paying for. The Jewish people would say, no, that's wrong. Take your thumb off the scale. In fact, heap a bit more on. Be generous. And when I was living in Coonabarabran years and years ago, we had a little store run by a Chinaman, Billy Wu. And Billy was a terrific old bloke. He had a little old shop, which was the local grocery shop for the town in those days. And he was a dear old man because he loved people and everyone loved him. And when you went to get your groceries, you get your boxes and you put them in the car, and he'd run out with a little bag. Here, take this home with you. And in it there'd be some lollies, chocolates or oranges or a can of beer for Dad, There was always just something that, little bit of generosity, something extra. Didn't pay for it. This is yours. And it always stayed with me, that spirit of generosity. Imagine that on a spiritual level. That's what the Jews are saying. And Jesus is building on this. This is what the Jews have come to. Christ came to fulfill the law, and he fulfilled it in all of its aspects, negative and positive. He went to the cross to die for sin, but he teaches us in his words how to live in the fullness of the Holy Spirit, in the fullness of life. So you don't just refrain from stealing, you actually are generous and you give to the people that you're working with. You give to them. You don't just not take their things, you give them stuff. You don't just refrain from gossiping about your neighbour, you actually speak kind words and bless them. This is revolutionary stuff. You don't hate your enemy. In fact, you don't just ignore them either, but you do good for them positively. And in the same way, you don't judge and condemn, you judge favourably. So this is the fulfilment of the law that Jesus has done for us. And we are now to practice this law this way, this generous lifestyle. In every situation, we can do two things. We can look for a good motive or we can look for a bad motive. That guy that nearly cut me off at the roundabout down there, I could curse him or I could think, well, maybe he was on his way to a very important appointment. Usually if I remember to put myself in the other person's shoes, I find it transforms me into a bit of a kinder person, a bit more patient. And I can feel my anger drain away. I'm still working on this, by the way, so don't think you can cut me off at the roundabout yet. You begin to give people the benefit. Maybe the neighbour who yelled at the kids and swore at the dog was an abusive person, but just maybe she grew up in a very abusive home and she suffers from depression. Maybe the boss was angry at work because he's got problems in his marriage. When someone shuts down your conversation about Christ, maybe they've had a bad experience in a church somewhere. Really bad. Helps you to think put yourself in their shoes. I spent a fair bit of time in hospital this week and I had time to walk around and look at people and just see what they were doing. And it struck me that there are multitudes of people with all sorts of situations and stories. It is full of people who are sick or suffering or recovering, all with a story, and some with horrific details, no doubt. Well, my 2-year-old granddaughter had broken her leg and she was in some pain. And the first night she was there, she was in a ward with 4 other beds. And on one occasion, the carer over the curtain, whoever it was, who happened to be a grandmother I learned later, was heard whining and complaining about little Heidi's crying. It was easy to be offended, but after I learned of her situation, it was a little bit easier to forgive. She was caring for a little drug baby whose progress was very slow and very exasperating. And she'd been there every day for 9 weeks. No doubt she was over it. No doubt she hungered for a bit of peace and quiet. Our hurt and anger drained away as we learned about her trial. So, it's good for us to think about this as we think about other people and their offences toward us. John Calvin says this, the proper way for the Church of Jesus Christ to conduct itself is to always form its judgment by the rule of charity, always begin by subjecting itself to examination. So, for Christians, be charitable. It means give generously, no matter what you're doing, especially in judgment. Especially in judgment. And because finally, the point about being commended by Christ is something that I want. I want this commendation. We've all been spared judgment for our sins by Jesus. We know what it's like to receive mercy. How can we then be like the hypocrite who goes out and says, "Give me the money I owe you," or else? How can we be like that? And we have the ability, but because we're infused with the Holy Spirit, which is an ability that no other human being outside of Christianity has. We have an ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes and to please God by doing His will. It's an important message for us to think about. Judgmentalism divides churches. It divides marriages. It divides families. And God knows our world needs this kind of light in this dark and hateful age that we live in. So I pray you live a life of repentance, killing off your own sin. And then it is possible, according to Jesus, to pass moral judgment on someone else without hypocrisy. But take care. I think it's easier to take Jesus' advice and concentrate on being generous. One day, every knee will bow before the Lord Jesus and confess His name, and we have to give an account of our lives. Christians too. I'm sure we would all want that commendation of the Lord Jesus in Luke 6. You receive a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, it'll be poured into your lap. And there's that picture of, receiving, the wheat or the barley, and they take it home. It's that kind of picture. A good measure, generous. That's akin to saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's the result of extending mercy and grace to others. Jesus would say, "Judge mercifully, since you know you're a sinner too." Let's finish with these words, and if we can see them, let's read them together. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Good things to remember. Amen.